Hi, everybody. It's Steve here with the first episode of The Ant and the Elephant Decoded. So, I just want to welcome everybody who's joining us, and we'll dive right in. So, right now, you might be wondering why I might be talking about The Ant and the Elephant. So, why it's important is that it's a parable that gives an introduction to my thinking as I outlined it in Flourishing, A Thinking Person's Guide to Happiness. Following the story is really following lessons that will both raise the key questions in terms of self-transformation, what's involved in it, and how to go about it, and also how to go about self-directed learning and how to use your learning in a way that you can monetize it. So these will be taken up in depth in an ongoing 30-day course that I will be offering in due course, and more on that later. But in the meantime, let me just get started with this decoding of the parable. So the first chapter starts with leaving the familiar behind. And if anybody is going to be able to do self-transformation, they're going to have to leave the familiar behind. Now, let me start out the story by just introducing you to the characters or the parable. So many years ago in the African savannah, something extraordinary happened. An ant, no larger than a drop of rain, found the strength, power, and determination he needed to move a gigantic elephant. So, of course, the ant didn't actually literally move the elephant. The ant learned to direct the elephant. So what is the ant? Well, in the parable, the ant is portrayed as our conscious mind. This is really the mind in which we mostly do self-talk, and is often called monkey mind because it's full of chatter, self-contradictory ideas, and thoughts which don't really pan out to work in terms of putting them into action. Now, the elephant is portrayed as the unconscious mind, but really what I'd like to call the elephant is the brain. And so the question really arises, how does our mind direct the brain? Now, the mind is really, in terms of the number of firings that actually go on to create a mind and consciousness, is a very, very small fraction of the total number of interactions, neural connections, and firings that go on in the brain. So it's almost like maybe 1% compared to 99%, and that's why the mind is really the ant compared to the elephant. Now, put in the context of flourishing, what we want to realize is that the mind does have a connection with the elephant, in that the mind can move into certain frequencies, and these frequencies carry information that connects the mind with the brain and, in fact, with the entire universe. These subatomic connections and connectivities are holographic and carry information that produce intelligence, both intelligence in terms of our own mental activity, intelligence in terms of the way that the brain comports itself, steering the body towards survival and flourishing, and also the way in which the whole universe unfolds. So it's all a matter of holographic interconnectedness. We typically are only aware, hey JL, we are typically only aware of the fact that the universe comes across to us as we experience it on our Earth in terms of our everyday life as kind of a reflection. We see stars in the heavens, we see the Earth from the satellites, and then we see our everyday environment or surroundings. All of this is just reflection. Underneath reflection, or the explicate order, is an implicate order. So the reflective order is only a tip of the iceberg, or the surface, which appears in kind of Cartesian space and time. The implicate order is holographic and carries with it the full emergence of the intelligence that's at work in a diffraction pattern set of frequencies. This set of diffraction patterns can be tapped into, and that's indeed the key to the unfolding of the parable of the ant and the elephant, where the ant is able to produce what's called elephant buzz and gets the elephant to change directions. So this whole story is all about changing direction and moving toward in the parable, moving toward the oasis. The oasis is equivalent or means flourishing. And how do we get to the point of moving toward the oasis rather than away from it? Now, it turns out ant is on an elephant who is marching initially in the wrong direction. But we'll come to that in a minute. So what happens when the ant wakes up after he's buffeted around by a huge storm? So the ant feels lost, and this is the condition that many of us find ourselves in. We find ourselves feeling lost. We don't know what to do, and the ant is in that situation. So what the ant does in the parable is the ant digs in and worries about survival. And of course, dreams, though, of the idea of moving back to reconnecting with his colony and entering into also a movement that will bring him into this fabled oasis that he's heard about. But how does he possibly get there? He's just a tiny ant. And so he needs a vehicle. And that will be the way the story unfolds. The vehicle will be the elephant, and we'll learn how the ant finds his way to the elephant. But before we get really into the full story, we're going to just start out with the topic today and of today's episode, which is, what do you do when you feel lost? And what I wanted to do is I wanted to share an incident or time in my life when I felt lost. This was when I, as an academic philosopher, decided that I wanted to change careers and move into psychotherapy or psychoanalysis. Hi, Martin. How you doing? Yeah, this is what the time in my life when I did feel lost. So when I wanted to become a psychotherapist or psychoanalyst, I looked around in the U.S. where I was teaching and found very few analysts who I considered philosophically literate, and therefore I didn't feel as though I could really understudy or work with them. And so I set my sights on studying with R.D. Laing, who was over in London. He was actually practicing the kind of philosophy I was studying as a theoretician, the existential approach to philosophy. And while I was doing theory, he was practicing it as a psychotherapist. And so I connected with Ronnie, and he encouraged me to join his training. So when I went on to actually begin the training, I was preparing to support myself by opening a branch of the college I was teaching at in London, and that would support me. However, 2 weeks before I was to make that transition, they fired the president of the college, and I was told that the plans to begin a college abroad experience, a college abroad program that I had already set the foundations for, were scrapped. And so I was faced with a dilemma. Would I just continue teaching as an academic, or would I go anyway? I decided to go anyway. And when I went, that was when I felt the most lost I had ever felt, because here I was without an income and not knowing how I would be able to support my family. At that time, I had a young son, and I was married. So that was the moment in time that I felt most lost. And I got very depressed, and I thought I would probably never earn any money again. However, as it turned out, I was able to get into analysis with one of the members of the Philadelphia Association, where I trained with. This was the organization that Ronnie Laing founded, an existential organization teaching a combination of philosophy and psychoanalysis, but you might say it was practical philosophy, a philosophy putting philosophy into practice. And so my teacher and mentor and analyst, Hugh Crawford, at the time, allowed me to move in to one of the Philadelphia Association households. Now, this was a household which was called an asylum, and the asylum took its name from the classical meaning of asylum, a place of refuge, and I took refuge there. But I took refuge with a bunch of people who were taking refuge as a way of avoiding having to be diagnosed by psychiatry as schizophrenics. So they took refuge from psychiatry in these houses, and those people who didn't want to go into mental hospital and be drugged, and those people who are training to work with people in those extreme situations, who were, you might say, freaked out and who had lost their contact with reality, that they all were living together as members of the house. And there wasn't a distinction between patient and therapist within the house itself. However, you can imagine moving from a staid academic philosophy professor in a small New England college into such a household, which was like moving into the center of a cyclone, where there was nonstop 24-hour-a-day mayhem, chaos, and confusion. That this was quite a state of feeling lost. However, it turned out that the best advice that I got from my mentor in terms of how to comport myself at that time was, well, I'm not in that house anymore, so I can't bring them online, Randy. But this was quite a number of years ago when I first began my training in psychotherapy and psychoanalysis. In the early 70s. And so what happened is that I learned the art of masterful inaction. And this was really the situation that Adair the ant learns. He practices a kind of form of masterful inaction. He simply just is, and he lets himself be where he is. And so the first lesson we learn from being lost is that we have to let ourselves be where we are, because you cannot move unless you first are where you are. Now, being where you are sounds simple, but actually it's quite deep. To be where you are means to really be fully there in where you are. And once you find yourself really where you are, you can actually move in a direction toward your goal, or in the ant's case, eventually toward the oasis or toward flourishing. But it's something only you can do, but you can't really do it alone. So the ant Adair had the owl Brio to help him, teach him what he needed to do to find his elephant, and to move with the elephant, to get the elephant to help move him toward together to partner, and then to move toward the oasis. So my mentor and teacher, Hugh Crawford, actually was my wise owl, who helped me then triangulate to really understand that where I was where I needed to be. I needed to dive into the depth of being with others in extreme states if I were to become move out of my head, or out of simply the ant part of myself, and connect with the elephant part. So that's basically the story that I wanted to tell and share. Was this time in my life when I was lost, and how it was that I was able to find myself moving in the right direction. It turned out the experience being in the asylum, I lived there with my family for about a year and a half, was the best possible introduction and transition to becoming an academic, someone who was mostly cut off and in my head, to someone who was really able to connect empathically, or be have empathy for people in extreme states of mind. And so working then with people in simply various other kinds of more personal crises became something that I was very easy with, and able to be with people in fact in whatever their problems turned out to be, in psychotherapy. And I of course practiced then as a therapist for many years. So that's the key, Martin, to be in the here and now, or to be present, and to learn how to be fully present and in the here and now requires certain practices, which I put into the development of awareness section of the book, Flourishing. And the tradition of developing mindfulness is one of the keys that we'll be discussing as we speak about how it is that Adair the ant learns how to harness the elephant's power, how he learns to connect with the elephant, and to get the elephant kind of elgo the elephant, to get elgo to turn around. It's not easy for elephants to learn how to turn around and to move out of their comfort zone, and to move out of, as you know, elephants are a store of memory, and they're a storehouse of memory, and they simply follow along with what their they've been told, or so the parable goes. And so to march out in an opposite direction is quite a major step for the elephant. So we need to start becoming more in the here and now and allowing ourselves to be lost. The thing is that there are many people who are in denial about how lost they really are, and they don't really even begin to recognize that they are lost. All they know is they're not happy, but they don't know why or what to do about it, but they feel that their norms are their only way to go forward. And what we want to do is we want to self-direct and learn self-transformation and self-directed learning, and ultimately to learn entrepreneurship, to learn, say, how to get out of the feeling of living paycheck to paycheck, or being trapped in a unwanted job, or being in a cubicle in an office in a company, and how to move out of those situations and move into a life that's a life of financial and personal freedom, which is a life that's living in the oasis. And so that's basically the overview, and also the first episode, what you do when you feel lost, and it's practicing this negative capability of not doing, so that you can just be. And just being rather than trying to flail around and do is the key to how to handle feeling lost. Because if you start to do things when you're digging in a hole, you just dig yourself more deeply into the hole. You don't get out of the hole. So I hope that that is a good start for our first episode, and I'll be coming back once a week, this sort of time, and I hope that you can bring some friends to share with you and me our ongoing decoding or commentary on the parable of the ant and the elephant. So if there are no other questions, I'll sign off. Okay, bye now.